I'm Margaret Ellison, 68 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've woken up to an empty side of the bed. Harold used to bring me a cup of tea every morning, Earl Grey with honey, just the way I liked it since he passed. I still reach across the sheets, sometimes expecting to find his warmth. The house has stayed mostly the same, the dent in the sofa cushion where he always sat. The clock in the hallway still ticking half a beat too slow. This morning was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping against the window and the reminder on my fridge that tonight was family dinner, the first one in nearly a year. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the walls in your home remember you better than the people inside it. I grew up in southern Illinois, the middle daughter of 3 girls raised in a house where the table was always set for one more plate and kindness was as expected as saying grace. My mother taught 2nd grade, my father ran a hardware store, and neither ever left a debt unpaid or a neighbor unfed. That kind of living settled deep in my bones. I married Harold at 23. He taught physics at the community college and could fix just about anything with a bit of copper wire and patience. We bought this house in 1977 with savings and hoped 2 stories brick chimney hydrangeas out front. It's where we raised our children Perry and Laura, and later where the grandkids came for summer visits and too many cookies. After Harold passed, I kept up the place on my own. I had my pension from 30 years working as a school librarian, and Harold, God bless him, left behind an investment portfolio that quietly grew while we lived modestly. I never told the kids about the money. It didn't seem necessary. Harold believed in letting people earn their way, and I always agreed. These days, Perry runs his own insurance office a few towns over. Laura, she goes by Elle, now does corporate accounting from some office building downtown. They're good people. Busy, though. Calls got shorter, visits less frequent. At first, I told myself it was just the season of life. Everyone has deadlines and carpool schedules. But then it became birthdays, missed holidays cut short, and dinners canceled with little more than a text. Still, I wanted tonight to be nice. I pulled the roast from the freezer before breakfast, just like Harold used to do. Peeled potatoes by hand, set the table with the china we only use for holidays. Perry always liked roast beef with rosemary, and Elle used to ask for extra carrots when she was little. I even made apple pie from scratch, the same one Perry once asked for 3 birthdays in a row. I wore my navy blue dress. Harold used to say it brought out the blue in my eyes. At 6 on the dot, Perry arrived with his wife Vanessa and their 2 kids, Jude and Heather. His hug was quick, his eyes already scanning the room. Vanessa air-kissed me without smudging her lipstick. Jude mumbled something without looking up from his phone. Only Heather smiled and asked how I'd been. Elle showed up 15 minutes later, flustered and apologizing about traffic. Her husband Frank gave me a warm hug, and little Abby, their youngest, stood beside them quietly clutching a small gift bag of tea she'd picked out for me. That girl's got a heart like her grandfather. Dinner started out like most. I carved the roast past the salad, offered everyone their favorites. The room was full, but I felt like I was watching through glass. They talked about meetings, school functions, new cars. Perry mentioned a BMW. Vanessa talked about her charity gala. Elle said she was thinking of moving to a new condo. I asked Jude if he wanted more potatoes, and Perry jumped in before I could move. "Don't get up, Mom. You know your blood pressure." The room chuckled. I laughed too at first, but then he called me the waitress, and they all laughed again. Even Jude looked up from his phone long enough to smirk. I stood there holding the tea pitcher, listening to their laughter wrap around the table like I wasn't standing right in the middle of it. That's when something in me shifted. Perry was still chuckling when I set the pitcher down and looked around the table. They had no idea. None of them seemed to notice the way I stood there silent with their laughter echoing around me like I was part of the wallpaper. Vanessa wiped her mouth, muttering something about the roast being dry. Elle leaned over to cut Abby's food without even glancing in my direction. Frank said thank you at least. I went to the kitchen, hand steady but cold, and pulled down a clean knife for the pie. I heard Perry behind me walking in like it was his kitchen. You don't have to do that, Mom. Sit. I'll take care of it. His voice had that half-smile tone he used when explaining something simple to a client. You've been on your feet all day. I said nothing, just stepped aside and watched as he sliced the pie like it was a performance. See, no pressure needed, just a steady hand. He portioned the slices, plating them like a chef on TV. Much easier this way. Back at the table, I sat and watched as he handed the slices around. No one looked up. They passed plates, added whipped cream, checked phones. I waited a few moments, then asked, "Who wants more tea?" Frank raised his hand. "I'll take some, thanks." "Me too," Grandma Abby added. I stood, but Perry stopped me again. "You don't need to do that. Sit down, you're not a waitress." And they laughed. All of them. Even Heather snorted. Jude smirked without looking up from his phone. Vanessa put her hand over her mouth like she was trying not to laugh, but couldn't help it. I stood frozen by the chair, the words spinning in my head like it had been waiting there for years. Waitress. I'd cooked, cleaned, paid for things they didn't remember asking for, smiled through canceled visits and rescheduled birthdays. And now, after all of that, they laughed. I straightened my spine and said quietly, "You're right. I'm not a waitress. I'm your mother. A mother who's become invisible in her own home." The room went silent. No clinking forks. No small talk. Just stillness. Perry cleared his throat. "Come on, Mom. I was just joking." I didn't answer. I sat down, folded my napkin, and looked out the window. Elle jumped in, changed the subject to Abby's school play. She got the part of a tree, she said, rolling her eyes like it was a punishment. Abby looked down at her plate. "Miss Patterson says the tree is important. It represents the forest." Elle sighed. "I was just hoping you'd get a part with lines. Something real." "I think it's wonderful," I said. "Without trees, we wouldn't have shade. Or apples for pie." Abby smiled up at me. Elle didn't. She sipped her wine and said nothing. "I just want her to have opportunities," she added eventually. "A part where she can show herself. Not stand silently on stage." "At what age should the doors start opening?" I asked. 10. 15. Mom Perry interrupted. "Let's not start. Elle just cares about Abby's future." "Like you cared about mine," I said. "Like you do now." That was when Vanessa spoke. "Honey, tell everyone about your promotion. It's such good news." Perry straightened. "Regional director. I'll be managing 4 branches now." "Congratulations," I said. "That's quite a responsibility." Vanessa chimed in. "He'll be going to more events, more dinners. I already bought 3 dresses. And a new car." 7 Series BMW, Perry added. "Black. Full package." Frank nodded, genuinely impressed. "That's a nice machine. But tough to park, isn't it?" "It parks itself." Vanessa laughed. "How much?" Elle asked. 80,000, Perry said like it was nothing. I set my fork down. $80,000 for a car. Perry leaned back. "It's an image thing. In my field, image matters." I looked at him. "Our savings paid for your degree." "I'm still grateful," he said quickly. "But times are different. It's not about penny pinching anymore. It's about making an impression." Elle jumped in. "Mom, speaking of money, Frank just got a contract in Portland. 6 months. It's a good job, but we'll need to rent a place. We were wondering if you could help with the first month." Frank looked uncomfortable. "We'll pay it back." I nodded. "How much?" 3 or 4,000, Elle said, avoiding my eyes. Perry shook his head. "Elle, Mom lives on a pension. You can't just, oh please. She doesn't drive. She doesn't travel. Her bills are low." "That's enough," I said. "I'll decide." Elle exhaled. Thanks, Mom. You're a treasure. From across the table, Jude looked up. Grandma, can I have money for a new laptop? Mine's super old. Vanessa's head snapped toward him. Jude, we talked about this. What he said. Dad said there's no money because of the car and the dresses. Grandma always helps. The silence that followed was heavy. Perry's jaw clenched. Vanessa looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Apologize, Perry said. For what? Jude asked, still holding his phone. It's true. I sat there, staring at my plate, the knife resting beside my slice of pie. For a moment, I saw Harold in my mind, laughing softly and shaking his head the way he did when life didn't make sense. I'll get more tea, I said. In the kitchen, I stood still, my hands pressed to the edge of the counter. I looked at the fridge. On it was a photo from our Ruby anniversary, 40 years of marriage. Harold's hand on mine, his smile gentle and steady. Back at the table, Heather was talking about choir practice. Abby mentioned the play again. Don't forget your sweater, Vanessa said. Your arthritis. I don't have arthritis, I said. It was just a sore knee from gardening. Still, Elle added, you should be careful at your age. At your age. That phrase again. At your age, don't drive. At your age, don't garden. At your age, just stay put and wait. Can you pass me the sugar? I asked Perry. He reached across, picked up the sugar, and added 1 spoonful into my tea. There, that's enough. You know your blood pressure. I stared at the cup, then pushed his hand away. I can manage my own sugar, I said. Perry held up his hands. I'm just trying to help. No, you're trying to control. Mom Elle sighed. Don't start. Caring, I said, is listening, not managing. Perry frowned. We've always cared. You laugh at me. You decide for me. You don't ask what I think or feel. You call me a waitress, and then you laugh. His mouth opened, then closed again. I've let this go for too long, I said. I was afraid of losing even the scraps of attention you give me. Vanessa leaned forward. Now you're being unfair. No, I'm being honest. I looked at my grandchildren. Heather wouldn't meet my eyes. Jude stared at his screen. Abby looked like she wanted to disappear. I've made a decision, I said. They looked up. I'm donating all my savings, $900,000, to a foundation that supports elderly people with no family. The room fell silent. Elle's fork dropped. Perry blinked hard. Vanessa went pale. You're joking, Elle whispered. I shook my head. Harold believed money should never be the reason we stay close, so I'm giving it to people who need it. You're just going to give it all away? Perry asked, stunned. Yes, I said. To someone who sees me as a person, not a purse. And then I stood. What happened next would change everything, but not the way any of them expected. For a long moment, no one said anything. I stayed standing, my hands resting gently on the back of the chair. They looked at me like I'd just spoken a different language. Perry leaned back slowly, like he was trying to process what he'd heard. Elle's eyes darted across the table. Frank stared at his plate. Vanessa sat stiff as stone, one hand still curled around her napkin. Even the children had gone quiet. Heather blinked quickly. Jude scratched behind his ear like he didn't know where to look, and Abby clutched the edge of the tablecloth between her fingers. Elle spoke first. You're kidding, right? You're not serious. I am, I said. Perry folded his arms. $900,000. You had that kind of money and you never said anything. It was your father's doing. He made good investments, and we agreed we'd live simply. It was never about the money. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice tight. But you're talking about giving it away, just like that, without even discussing it with us. I looked at her. When you and Perry bought an $80,000 car, did you discuss it with me? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Perry stepped in. Mom, let's be reasonable. You don't make decisions like this in the middle of dinner. It wasn't a spontaneous decision, I said. I've been thinking about it for a long time. Frank cleared his throat. Leila, I understand how you feel. And I respect your right to do what you want. But maybe think it through. For the grandkids, if not for us. I have thought it through, I said, and Harold would have wanted me to do something meaningful. Not just leave it to people who only remember I exist when something needs fixing or paying for. Elle let out a sharp breath. You've had this money all these years, and you've been living like someone scraping by, asking me to pick up medicine from the pharmacy to save a couple dollars. Frugality is not a crime, I said. Your father and I were careful, but we never forgot who we were saving for. Perry leaned forward. Mom, don't do this. You're punishing us. No, I'm giving you the truth. If Harold and I had wanted to leave the money to you outright, we would have set up something legal. We didn't. Because we believed that love should not come with a dollar sign attached. Elle pushed her chair back. This is emotional blackmail. It's not, I said calmly. It's consequences. Not for your careers, not for your busy lives, but for how you've come to see me, how you treat me. No, Perry said, shaking his head. That's not fair. You don't ask how I spend my days. You don't know who my friends are. You only ask when something needs to be done. You only call when a favor needs doing or a check needs writing. Heather's voice cut through the room, quiet but clear. She's right. Everyone turned toward her. She was sitting perfectly still, one hand resting on her glass, her eyes focused on the table. Vanessa sat up straighter. Heather, this is not your place. Yes, it is, she said. Grandma's right. You all talk over her, decide for her, like she can't do anything anymore. Elle started to say something, but Heather didn't stop. You say she should get out more, make friends, try new things. But when she wanted to come to Spain with us last summer, you said no. You said it was a family trip. I looked over at her, surprised. I hadn't realized she remembered that. I hadn't realized it mattered. Perry sat back slowly, rubbing his jaw. That's not Heather. You don't understand the full picture. I understand enough, she said. You're not mad about the money going to charity. You're mad because it's not going to you. No one spoke. Jude looked up briefly, then back at his phone. Abby looked at me, her eyes wide and full. I reached for Heather's hand. Thank you, sweetheart. But your parents and I need to finish this talk. She nodded and sat back, but she didn't look away. Perry cleared his throat. All right, he said. We've made mistakes, maybe a lot of them. But to just cut us out, I'm not making a final decision tonight, I said. I'll wait 6 months. During that time, we'll see. We'll talk. And I'll decide at the end of that what to do. Elle frowned. What are you expecting? That we'll suddenly call every day? That we'll show up with flowers? I'm not expecting anything, I said. But I'll be watching, listening. I need to know if we can rebuild something real. Something not tied to my checkbook. Frank nodded slowly. That's fair. Perry was quiet for a moment. And if we don't meet your expectations, then the money will go to charity. All of it. And maybe that would be the right thing. Vanessa stood. You realize how this sounds, don't you? Like you're testing us. I realize, I said. But I also know that nothing changes without a pause. Without a line drawn in the sand. Elle looked down at her lap, then back up. So what now? I'm going to visit Eleanor. I'll be staying in Oregon with her for a while. Elle blinked. Aunt Ellie. All the way in Oregon. She's been asking me for years. Now seems like the right time. You're leaving? Perry said. Just like that. No, I said. I'm giving us space to think, to feel, to decide. Abby's voice was quiet. Are you still coming to my play? I walked over and hugged her. Of course I am. I promised. And I always keep my promises. Heather stood too, her eyes watery. I don't want you to go, Grandma. I know, honey. But sometimes, time apart helps people see more clearly. Jude cleared his throat. When are you leaving end of the week? I said. You already planned all this? Elle asked. I was waiting to see how tonight went, I answered. So this dinner was a test, Perry said. No, it was just dinner. But it confirmed what I already felt. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he looked up at me. Was it the joke, the waitress thing? It was the way you all laughed. Perry's face changed. He looked down, then said quietly, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I nodded. Thank you. Elle stood, walked out to the back patio without a word. Frank followed a few moments later. Vanessa stayed seated silent, staring at her hands. What will we tell people? She finally asked. Tell them I'm visiting my sister, I said. That's the truth. Perry stood and began clearing the plates. I started to move, but he stopped me. I'll do it, he said. It's the least I can do. I watched him gather the dishes slower than I'd ever seen him move before. Heather helped. Jude stood and grabbed the pie pan, pretending he wasn't affected. Through the window, I saw Elle out in the garden, arms crossed. Frank talking gently beside her. I didn't know what the next few months would bring. I didn't know if anything would really change. But as Perry stood at the sink, rinsing off plates, and Heather showed him where the dishwasher tabs were, I allowed myself one small thought. Maybe this was what needed to happen. Maybe now, finally, they saw me. The train left just after 8 a.m., slicing quietly through the edge of town as the sun pulled itself higher across the sky. I sat by the window, a light sweater draped over my shoulders, my suitcase tucked beneath the seat. In my lap rested a small notebook I hadn't opened in years, just a plain, leather-bound thing Harold once gave me for keeping recipes. I hadn't used it for that, not really. Inside were dates, letters, clipped corners of calendars where I'd jotted down birthdays, medical appointments, old addresses, grocery lists. I wasn't sure why I brought it with me, only that it felt like it needed to come. The seat across from me stayed empty until we passed Reno. Then a woman with gray-streaked hair and a canvas bag asked if it was taken. I smiled and moved my things. Her name was Dorothy, and she was going to visit her grandson near the coast. We talked for a while about books and birds and how train food never quite lived up to memory. She dozed off by the time we reached Klamath Falls, her head gently leaning against the window, and I sat quietly with the steady hum of the rails beneath me. Oregon rolled past in soft greens and darker pines. When we pulled into the Eugene station, I spotted Eleanor, immediately wide-brimmed hat, striped scarf, one hand up in the air, before I even stepped onto the platform. I hadn't seen her in almost 6 years. Her hug was firm and warm, and she didn't ask any questions. Just helped me with my bag and walked me to her car, the same old Subaru she'd had for a decade. Her house smelled like rosemary and old books. A 2-bedroom nestled between trees and tucked off a gravel road. We had tea that afternoon on her screened porch while the birds darted through the feeder outside. She didn't press me to talk, and I didn't offer anything yet. It was the quiet that helped most, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. That evening, I called Perry. He didn't answer. I tried Elle, too. Straight to voicemail. The next morning, I texted Heather to let her know I'd arrived safely. She replied within minutes. Glad you made it. Miss you already. Call me soon. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting it face down beside the teacup. Eleanor handed me a newspaper. There's a community center 2 blocks down, she said. They have a sewing group. You might like it. I didn't answer right away, but 2 days later, I walked over. The center smelled faintly of chalk dust and coffee. There were folding tables lined with bolts of fabric, women laughing softly while pinning patterns to muslin. A younger woman with cropped hair and bright glasses introduced herself as May. You looking to mend something? She asked, or make something new? I'm not sure yet, I said. But I've got time to find out. She handed me a pair of shears and a folded apron pattern. Then you're in the right place. That first morning, I listened more than I spoke. Women of all ages gathered there, some retired, some just between jobs, some raising grandchildren. The talk drifted between casserole recipes and medication copays, between frustrations and funny stories. It felt nothing like the dinner table back home. It felt easy. By the 3rd week, I'd made 3 aprons, hemmed a pair of jeans someone had given up on, and was working on a quilt square with Eleanor's help. I still hadn't heard from Perry or Elle. Frank sent a polite message. Hope you're well. Abby misses you. I replied with a thank you and nothing more. Vanessa hadn't said a word, and Jude stayed silent too. But Heather called every Sunday. Sometimes we didn't talk about much. Other times she'd tell me about school, or a song she liked, or how she was learning to cook baked ziti. I listened, and I remembered what it felt like to matter in a room. Eleanor had a neighbor named Tom, widower. Quiet man, worked in wood. He brought over a little stool he'd fixed for her porch swing one afternoon, and we all ended up having coffee together. The next time he visited, he brought a paper bag of apples from his tree. I baked a pie and gave him half. I hadn't had a pie like that since '92, he said, shaking his head and smiling. We started walking together some mornings. Nothing heavy, just a slow loop around the neighborhood. He told stories about his dog, about losing his wife, about a niece who lived in Wisconsin. I told him about Harold. He didn't ask about my children, and I didn't bring them up. At night, I slept better. Not because the mattress was softer or the air cooler, but because I wasn't bracing for something. No doorbell. No phone call. No one hovering behind me in the kitchen asking if I was sure I needed that much sugar in my tea. It was on a Tuesday afternoon folding laundry that I felt something had shifted. Not in them, not in Elle or Perry or Vanessa, but in me. The silence back home wasn't hurting anymore. It was just there, and I wasn't waiting for it to break. That evening, Eleanor and I had soup on the porch. She brought out an old photo album from our college days. There was one picture I hadn't seen in decades, Harold young and lanky, holding my hand in front of the student center. He always looked at you like you were the whole sky, Eleanor said softly. I traced the edge of the photo. I forgot that I said. He didn't, she replied. I stayed quiet after that. Later that night, I opened the little leather-bound notebook, flipped through the pages of scribbled notes and half-torn corners. I wrote one new sentence on the very last page. I am no longer waiting. The next morning, I signed up for a volunteer shift at the center, helping older residents with meal prep and reading assistance. May hugged me when I showed up early. You're family now, she said. For the first time in years, I believed it. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address, Just my name written in Perry's handwriting, tight, deliberate, like he'd pressed harder than usual. Eleanor had fetched it from the mailbox that morning and left it on the kitchen table next to a bowl of plums. I let it sit there while I finished folding the towels, then took my time sweeping the front steps. The envelope was still there when I came back inside. I poured a cup of tea before finally opening it. There were only 2 pages. No greeting, no apology. Just a typed note that started with the date and a subject line, proposed allocation for discussion. Below that, Perry had laid out a detailed outline. He'd broken the estate into percentages, included notes on taxes, a modest amount for comfort care, and a line item labeled Heather's future education needs. I read through it twice. There was no mention of Harold, no mention of me, nothing personal, just numbers and bullet points, as if I were a committee member voting on a grant proposal. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it under my notebook without a word. Later that afternoon, Eleanor handed me a second envelope. This one was lavender. Inside was a card from Heather, drawings of violets around the edges, and a short note written in blue pen. Grandma, we started poetry in English class. I picked a piece by Emily Dickinson. I miss you. Jude says hi. Love, H. I left the card open on the windowsill beside the kitchen sink. The sun caught the corner of it each morning. That evening, I walked over to the community center to help serve at the Friday potluck. May waved me over, and we got to work setting out lasagna trays and pitchers of iced tea. Around 7, Tom showed up with a plate of cornbread and a stack of folding chairs. I took the seat beside him, and we ate in comfortable silence while a local quartet played folk music near the back doors. After dinner, Tom walked me home. We didn't say much, but just before reaching the steps, he turned to me. You seem quieter than usual, he said. I got a letter, I told him. Good one or bad? Still figuring that out. He nodded, and we stood like that for a moment under the porch light, moths fluttering in the warm circle of glow. Then he tipped his cap and went on down the path. That night, I reread Perry's letter. I wrote back the next morning. My reply was only a page long. I told him I appreciated his effort. I said I needed more than a spreadsheet. I asked him to send a second letter, one with words not typed by a lawyer or accountant. I asked him to tell me who he was when no one was looking, and I told him I'd do the same. I mailed it from the post office 2 blocks over and spent the next 3 days organizing shelves at the center. May had a donation of hand-me-down cookbooks she wanted to catalog, and I was happy for the excuse to keep busy. By the end of the week, a second letter arrived. Handwritten, messy, 2 pages front and back. He started with, I didn't know what to say. Then slowly, line by line, he tried. He told me he missed Harold. Said he didn't talk about it much because it still made his chest tight. Said it made him angry sometimes, and he didn't like that feeling. He wrote about work, how tired he was, how empty it all felt lately. Then he wrote something I hadn't expected. I think I've forgotten how to be someone's son. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't write back right away. 2 days later, I got a text from Vanessa. Just 1 line. I heard Perry wrote to you. Should I replied. That's up to you. Nothing came after that. No text, no call. But Elle reached out next. A voicemail. Short. Her voice strained but steady. I'm sorry for the way dinner went. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Can we talk? We spoke the next evening. She told me she'd been going through old photos. Said she'd forgotten how young Harold looked in their wedding pictures. Said Heather had mentioned our Sunday calls, and it made her realize she couldn't remember the last time we spoke about anything that didn't involve errands. I'm not proud of that, she said. Neither am I replied. She asked if she could come visit. I told her not yet. That I needed more time. That this wasn't about punishment, it was about space. She understood. That same weekend, I walked with Tom down to the river trail. The trees were starting to shift early signs of fall in the red tips of the leaves. He asked how things were with my family. I told him they were trying. "You think that'll be enough?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I think I'm finally asking the right questions." He didn't say anything, just offered his arm as we stepped over a root. At the center, I signed up to co-lead a beginner's class for mending. May handed me a binder and a name tag. "You've got a good way with people," she said, "and patience. We could use more of that." Back home, Eleanor brought out a box of letters Harold had written her during their early years. One had a dried flower tucked inside. I hadn't seen his handwriting in years, but the loop of the H's and the way he dotted his I's hadn't changed. It felt like something had been passed back to me. The days started to settle into rhythm. I called Abby on her birthday. Heather and I planned a video chat for next week. I still hadn't heard from Jude, and Vanessa remained silent, but something was beginning to take root. I wrote one more line in the notebook beside the sentence I'd written weeks before. Just 4 words this time, "I'm open to trying." The morning I left for the lake house, the air was still and heavy, the kind that presses into your shoulders. I packed 2 overnight bags, one with clothes, one with papers. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not even Eleanor. Just left a note on the counter beside the fruit bowl, letting her know I'd be back in a couple days. I filled the car with gas and stopped at the corner diner for coffee. The man at the window smiled and handed me 2 creamers without asking. I drove the old highway north, the one Harold and I used to take on weekends before the kids were born. The one that winds past cornfields and old red barns with roofs beginning to sag. The lake house was smaller than I remembered, tucked back behind a line of pine trees, paint peeling slightly around the porch railings. But the door opened easily, and the key still turned smooth in the lock. The air inside smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I walked through the rooms, slowly touching walls, opening windows, running my hand along the top of the piano we'd moved there in 1989. I unpacked the bags, made tea, and sat in the sunroom where the lake shimmered between the trees. Harold had loved this place. Said the quiet helped him think. It had been in his family for years, passed down from his father, and before that, his grandfather. After he passed, the house became a question mark. Perry brought up selling it once, just briefly, before I shut the idea down. I hadn't been back in almost 4 years. Around noon, I pulled out the folder. The one with the will, the updated deed, the bank documents. I'd gone over every page with Harold twice before he died. He wanted everything to be clear, precise, no room for confusion. The house was mine outright. There was a clause about preservation, something about keeping it in the family or converting it to a foundation if certain conditions weren't met. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. But now, it all read differently. I sat there for hours, rereading, marking the edges with paper clips. Then I called an old friend of Harold's, Raymond Lucas, retired now, but still sharp. He'd helped draft the documents all those years ago. I left a message with his office line and set the phone down. By late afternoon, I walked the trail down to the water. The dock was still there, though 2 boards near the end had warped from weather. The canoe sat upside down beside the boathouse, a little green with age. I sat on the edge and watched the light change. The next morning, Raymond called back. We talked for almost an hour. He remembered the clause I was asking about. Confirmed it was intentional. "Harold wanted you to have the final say," he said. "If the property ever became a point of contention, you'd be the one to decide its future. No vote, no pressure, just yours." I thanked him. Hung up. Sat for a long time without moving. Back at the house, I pulled out the letter Perry had sent. Reread the line about transition planning. It was clear now what they wanted. To divide, to liquidate, to settle things like a company asset. I opened a blank sheet of stationery, wrote the date at the top. Then I began, Dear Perry, Dear Elle, I've spent the last few days at the lake house. I wanted to be sure of what I felt before I wrote you. This place holds more than memories. It holds intention. Your father believed in legacy, not just in assets or numbers, but in meaning. He wanted this house to remain intact, and I intend to honor that. I told them I would be establishing a family trust, that the lake house would remain as is maintained by that trust and available to their families with permission, but not for sale, not for leverage, not for division. I said they were welcome to visit to stay to create new memories. But the ownership would not pass to them, not now, not later. I signed the letter and placed a copy in the folder. The original would go to Raymond for safekeeping. I made tea, washed the breakfast dishes, and packed up the car. Before I left, I walked the edge of the property one last time. Just as I reached the bend, where the pines grew thickest, I saw something tied to a low branch. A piece of string. At the end of it, dangling in the breeze, was an old fishing bobber, one of Harold's. Still red and white, still chipped along the side. I left it there. When I returned home, Eleanor met me at the door. Said there'd been a voicemail from Vanessa. I didn't ask what it said. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table. The sun through the window warmed my back as I unfolded the trust forms and began filling in the blanks. The letter went out on a Monday. Vanessa called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. Perry followed 2 hours later, short and clipped. He asked if we could meet. I told him I'd be available Friday afternoon, same as Vanessa. Same time, same place. I figured we might as well get through it all at once. I set out 3 chairs in the garden. They arrived separately, neither one acknowledging the other at first. Vanessa wore black, sharp, tailored formal. Perry kept his sunglasses on even after I offered him water. We sat in the shade beneath the old maple, the same one Harold planted when we moved in. The wind stirred the leaves just enough to remind me summer was nearly over. I opened a folder and slid 2 copies of the trust agreement across the table. Neither one touched theirs right away. I read your letter, Vanessa said, folding her arms. Is this final? I nodded. It is. Perry picked up his copy. His brow furrowed as he skimmed the first page, then flipped forward. You're putting the house into a trust, excluding us from any direct inheritance. You're not excluded, I said quietly. You're included differently. Vanessa didn't look up. So we're just visitors now. Your family, I said. But this house, this land, it was never meant to be broken apart or traded. Your father made that clear. I'm honoring that. They were silent for a long time. Eventually, Perry asked if there would be any financial compensation. I told him yes, there was a separate fund, modest but sufficient for maintenance and shared family use. Vanessa asked if she'd need permission to bring her children. I said no, as long as the house remained respected and the rules stayed intact. She pressed her lips together and nodded once. Perry leaned back and stared across the garden. Then he asked the question I'd been expecting. So what happens? When you pass, I met his eyes. The trust becomes a nonprofit foundation, managed by a board of caretakers, none of them direct family. It will be available to the public for quiet retreats, reading programs, grief support, and caregiver rest. Vanessa's jaw tightened. You're giving it away. I'm passing it forward, I said. Perry's voice dropped. But you didn't even ask us. No, I said, because when I did ask, when I tried to include you, you both saw the house as a transaction, as leverage. That's not what it is. No one spoke for a while. The garden was quiet except for the rustle of leaves and a blue jay calling in the distance. I stood slowly. "You're welcome to stay for lunch. I made egg salad and fresh rolls. Or I can pack it for you to take." Perry stood, but didn't answer. Vanessa stayed seated, her fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the chair. "I'll take mine to go," she said finally. I nodded. They left 10 minutes later. Vanessa didn't hug me. Perry lingered just the second longer, as if he might. Then he turned and followed her down the walkway. That night, I lit a candle for Harold in the living room. I sat beside it and read through the trust documents one more time. I didn't need to, but I did anyway. When the flame burned low, I blew it out and went to bed. The next day, I received an email from Eleanor. The subject line read, "Just thought you should know." Attached was a screenshot of Vanessa's social media post. A photo of the lake house in summer, the caption carefully worded. "Inherited beauty, not everything can be owned. Some things are meant to be shared." No mention of the trust, no mention of the nonprofit. Just the image filtered and soft with her standing on the dock like she belonged there. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and got back to work. The last phase wasn't finished yet. There were forms to finalize, trustees to confirm, and letters to draft for the county board. But I could feel the shift. The house was no longer a question. It had become something else now. Something quiet. Something rooted. And I knew by the time fall came, everything would be in motion. The first frost came early that year. I remember stepping onto the porch one morning and seeing the grass dusted in white, the kind that melts by mid-morning, but reminds you subtly that the season is turning. By then, the paperwork was done. The nonprofit had been officially recorded with the county. I had the certificate framed not to hang, but just to keep in the top drawer of Harold's old desk. It felt right there, out of sight, but present, like him. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon most days. I'd taken to baking small batches of muffins, freezing what I didn't eat, and setting some aside for neighbors. I wasn't trying to fill time. I was just letting it pass naturally. One morning, just before Thanksgiving, I found a small envelope in the mailbox. No stamp. Just my name, Edith, written in a tight, careful hand. Inside was a folded note from Michaela. She didn't say much, just that she'd heard about the house, the trust, the foundation. That she understood now, maybe not everything, but enough. And that if there ever came a time I wanted company on the porch, she'd be grateful to sit with me a while. I set the note down and sat still for a long time. Later that day, I pulled out an old wool blanket and draped it over the second chair on the porch. Just in case. Darren never wrote. I didn't expect him to. Some distances are chosen, others are inherited. Either way, I'd made peace with what I could reach. The foundation held its first gathering just after the new year. 6 women came, widows, caregivers, 1 retired nurse. We drank tea by the fireplace, walked along the lake path, read quietly in the sunroom. No one asked too many questions. No one needed to. After they left, I found a small card on the windowsill. One of the women had written, "This house remembers people." I kept that one too. By spring, the dogwood tree in the front yard bloomed the way it used to when Garrett was small. Pale pink and soft, like the world had taken a deep breath and decided to start again. Sometimes, I still set 3 plates at the table. Habit mostly. Sometimes for Eleanor when she visits. Sometimes for nobody at all. It doesn't feel like a loss anymore. Just a memory that knows how to stay without hurting. The house is quiet now, but not empty. There's a difference. And I've learned that dignity once claimed doesn't need to be defended. It lives in the choices we make when no one else is watching. In the spaces we protect. In the silence we no longer fear. Thank you for listening. If any part of this story stayed with you, I hope you'll share it or just sit with it a while. Some stories don't need answers, just a place to be heard.